Sarah Martinez walked into the busy airport terminal, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder, and her military ID tucked safely in her wallet. At 28, she looked like any other traveler heading home after a long trip. Her jeans were faded, her sneakers comfortable, and her brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested the incredible journey she had just completed, or the dangerous mission she had carried out in the shadows. The TSA line stretched endlessly ahead of her. Business travelers tapped impatiently on their phones, while families juggled crying babies and oversized luggage. Sarah joined the queue, her eyes automatically scanning the crowd out of habit. Years of training had taught her to notice everything: the nervous man checking his watch repeatedly, the woman who kept looking over her shoulder, the security cameras positioned at every corner. When she finally reached the security checkpoint, Sarah handed over her military identification to the TSA agent. The young man barely glanced at it before looking back at her with obvious skepticism. He held the ID up to the light, squinting at the photo and then at Sarah's face. "This doesn't look right," he muttered, his voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You sure this is yours, miss?" Sarah remained calm, though she felt the familiar frustration building inside her chest. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned her credentials. Her petite frame and youthful appearance often made people doubt she could be anything more than a college student or office worker. "Yes, that's my identification," she replied quietly, keeping her voice steady. "I'm active duty military." The agent called over his supervisor, a stern-looking woman in her 50s who examined the ID with equal suspicion. Other passengers in line began to whisper and point. Some pulled out their phones, clearly hoping to record whatever drama was about to unfold. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step aside for additional screening," the supervisor announced. "This identification raises some concerns." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she was led to a separate area. The whispers grew louder behind her. She could hear fragments of conversation, probably fake, kids these days, trying to get military discounts. Each comment stung, but she had learned long ago to control her emotions in public situations. The supervisor called over 2 more agents, and soon Sarah found herself surrounded by skeptical faces. They examined her ID under special lights, ran it through multiple scanners, and peppered her with questions about military protocols and procedures. Sarah answered each question correctly, her responses crisp and professional, but their doubt only seemed to grow. "Look, lady," one of the agents said, his tone condescending, "we deal with fake IDs all the time. Just because you memorized some military facts doesn't mean this card is real. You're going to have to come with us for further questioning." The crowd around them had grown larger. Passengers delayed in the security line craned their necks to get a better view of the commotion. Some looked annoyed by the holdup. Others seemed entertained by the spectacle. Sarah stood in the center of it all, maintaining her composure while inside she felt a mixture of anger and sadness. She thought about the classified missions she had completed just days before, the lives she had helped save, the intelligence she had gathered in hostile territory. She remembered the months of grueling training, the nights spent studying enemy tactics, the physical and mental challenges she had overcome to earn her place in one of the military's most elite units. None of that seemed to matter now as she stood in an airport security checkpoint, being treated like a fraud by people who couldn't see past her appearance. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very qualities that made her so effective in covert operations, her ability to blend in and look unremarkable, were now working against her in the most ordinary of circumstances. As the agents continued their debate about what to do with her, Sarah closed her eyes briefly and took a deep breath. She had faced enemy combatants, survived in harsh conditions, and completed missions that would remain classified for decades. She could certainly handle a few skeptical TSA agents, even if their treatment of her felt like a betrayal of everything she had sacrificed for her country. Little did anyone know that within minutes, everything would change, and the truth about Sarah Martinez would be revealed in the most unexpected way possible. The TSA supervisor, Janet Williams, had been working airport security for over 15 years. She prided herself on catching fake documents and suspicious travelers. Looking at the young woman standing before her, Janet felt certain she had uncovered Another attempt at identity fraud. The military ID looked legitimate enough, but the person carrying it seemed completely wrong for the role. "Listen, honey," Janet said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We see this kind of thing all the time. Kids trying to use stolen military IDs to get benefits or skip security lines. Just tell us where you got this card and we can work something out." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her voice level. "Ma'am, that identification is mine. I earned it through years of service and training. I'm asking you to verify it properly through military channels if you have concerns." The other agents exchanged glances and snickered quietly. One of them, a younger man named Derek, shook his head dismissively. "Right, and I'm a Navy SEAL," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, earning chuckles from his colleagues. The situation was spiraling out of control. More passengers had gathered to watch, and some were openly filming the confrontation with their smartphones. Sarah could see the headlines already. "Young woman caught with fake military ID," or "Airport drama as student impersonates soldier." The truth would be buried beneath assumptions and prejudices. Janet decided to escalate the situation further. She picked up her radio and called for airport police, claiming they had a case of identity fraud that needed immediate attention. Within minutes, 2 uniformed officers arrived at the security checkpoint, their presence drawing even more attention to the unfolding drama. "What seems to be the problem here?" asked Officer Martinez, a veteran policeman who had seen his share of airport incidents. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, noting her youth and casual appearance. Janet launched into her explanation, painting Sarah as a deceptive young woman trying to pass herself off as military personnel. The TSA agents nodded along, adding their own embellishments to the story. They described how Sarah had become defensive when questioned, how her answers seemed rehearsed, and how unlikely it was that someone so young and small could be a real soldier. Throughout this character assassination, Sarah remained silent. She knew that anything she said would likely be twisted against her. Years of training had taught her when to speak and when to listen. This was definitely a time to listen and wait for the right moment to act. The airport police officers examined her ID carefully, comparing it to reference materials they carried. Unlike the TSA agents, they seemed more professional in their approach, though Sarah could still sense their underlying doubt about her credentials. "The ID appears to be authentic from what we can tell," Officer Martinez admitted reluctantly. "But we'll need to run some additional checks. Ma'am, you're going to have to come with us while we sort this out." The crowd of onlookers buzzed with excitement. Some passengers were growing impatient with the delays, while others seemed entertained by the unfolding drama. Sarah heard someone behind her say, "I can't believe she thought she'd get away with it," and another person respond, "She's probably just trying to get attention." As the officers prepared to escort her away from the security checkpoint, Sarah made one last attempt to resolve the situation peacefully. She looked directly at Janet and spoke clearly enough for everyone around them to hear. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns about security, and I respect the job you're trying to do. All I'm asking is that you contact the appropriate military authorities to verify my credentials. There are protocols in place for exactly this kind of situation." Janet waved her hand dismissively. "Sweetheart, I've been doing this job since before you were born. I know a fake when I see one, and your whole act isn't fooling anyone." The condescending tone and the public humiliation finally began to crack Sarah's professional composure. She had endured enemy interrogations with more dignity than she was being shown by her own countrymen. The irony was bitter. She had risked her life defending the freedoms that these same people now enjoyed, only to be treated as a criminal when she tried to exercise those freedoms herself. As she was led away from the security checkpoint, Sarah caught sight of herself in a reflective surface. She looked exactly like what she was, a tired young woman trying to get home after a difficult assignment. There was nothing in her appearance that screamed elite operative or decorated soldier. Perhaps that was the real problem. People expected their heroes to look a certain way, and she didn't fit the mold they had created in their minds. The walk to the airport security office felt longer than some of the covert missions she had completed. Every step took her further from her flight and deeper into a bureaucratic nightmare that seemed to have no end in sight. In the small windowless security office deep within the airport, Sarah found herself sitting across from 3 airport officials and 2 police officers. The room smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on everyone's faces. The walls were covered with security protocols and wanted posters, creating an atmosphere that made even innocent people feel guilty. Detective Lisa Chen had been called in as backup when the situation escalated. She was known for her thorough investigations and no-nonsense approach to questioning. Looking at Sarah, she saw what everyone else saw, a young woman who seemed far too ordinary to be involved in military operations. "Let's start from the beginning," Detective Chen said, opening her notepad. "What's your full name and how did you obtain this military identification?" Sarah provided her complete information, including her service number, unit designation, and commanding officer's contact details. She answered every question with precision, never hesitating or showing signs of deception that trained interrogators look for. Yet somehow her confidence seemed to make the officials even more suspicious. "She's really committed to this story," whispered one of the TSA supervisors to another. "Must have done her homework before trying this scam." The questioning continued for over an hour. They asked about military procedures, chain of command, base locations, and protocols that only genuine service members would know. Sarah answered each question flawlessly, but her interrogator seemed determined to find inconsistencies that simply didn't exist. Meanwhile, her flight departure time was approaching rapidly. Sarah tried to explain that she had connecting flights and important commitments, but her concerns were dismissed as attempts to pressure them into releasing her quickly. "If you're really military like you claim," Detective Chen said with obvious skepticism, "then you should understand the importance of thorough security procedures. We're just doing our job." Sarah almost laughed at the irony. She understood security procedures better than anyone in that room. She had helped develop some of the protocols they claimed to be following, but pointing that out would only make her sound more delusional in their eyes. The office phone rang, interrupting the tense questioning session. Janet answered it with her usual authoritative tone, expecting it to be another routine security matter. Instead, she found herself speaking to a military liaison officer who had been contacted as part of their verification process. "Yes, we're holding someone who claims to be military personnel," Janet explained, shooting a skeptical glance at Sarah. "We believe the identification may be fraudulent. The individual just doesn't fit the profile of what we'd expect from military personnel." The voice on the other end of the phone grew serious. "What exactly do you mean by doesn't fit the profile? Can you describe the individual and provide the service number from the identification?" Janet confidently rattled off Sarah's information, expecting the military official to confirm her suspicions about the fake ID. Instead, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. She could hear papers shuffling and keyboard typing. In the background, "Ma'am," the military liaison said carefully, "I'm going to need you to hold that individual exactly where they are. Do not let them leave, and do not allow anyone else access to them. I'm sending someone immediately to handle this situation." The tone in the officer's voice made Janet's confidence waver for the first time. This wasn't the response she had expected. Military officials usually thanked them for catching fraudulent documents and advised them to turn the matter over to local police. This sounded different, almost urgent. "Is there a problem with our procedures?" Janet asked, suddenly feeling less certain about her judgment. "Just follow my instructions exactly," the liaison replied firmly. "Keep the individual secure and comfortable, and wait for my representative to arrive. This is now a matter of national security protocol." The phrase "national security protocol" sent a chill through the room. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at each other with growing uncertainty. Sarah noticed the shift in atmosphere, but remained calm, knowing that the truth was finally beginning to surface. Detective Chen approached Janet after she hung up the phone. "What did they say exactly?" Janet repeated the conversation, her voice lacking its earlier confidence. The other officials in the room began to look uncomfortable, realizing that perhaps they had made a serious error in judgment. Sarah spoke for the first time in over an hour. "I tried to tell you that proper verification procedures existed for situations like this. All you had to do was follow protocol instead of making assumptions based on appearances." Her calm, professional tone only added to the growing tension in the room. The people who had been so certain of her guilt just minutes before now found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the situation. Outside the office, Sarah could hear increased activity in the airport corridors. Security. Personnel were moving with purpose, and there seemed to be more radio chatter than usual. Something was definitely happening, and it was all connected to her detained presence in that small, uncomfortable room. 20 minutes after the mysterious phone call, the security office door opened to admit two individuals who immediately changed the entire atmosphere of the room. The first was a woman in her 40s wearing a crisp business suit and carrying credentials that made everyone straighten up in their chairs. The second was a military officer whose uniform displayed ribbons and insignia that spoke of extensive combat experience and high-level clearances. "I'm Agent Rebecca Walsh, Department of Defense Special Investigations," the woman announced, her voice carrying an authority that made Janet suddenly wish she had handled things very differently. "This is Colonel James Mitchell. We're here regarding the individual you've been detaining." The colonel's eyes immediately found Sarah, and something passed between them, a look of recognition and mutual respect that didn't go unnoticed by the airport officials. Sarah gave an almost imperceptible nod, the kind of subtle communication that happens between people who have worked in similar high-stakes environments. Agent Walsh continued, her gaze sweeping across the assembled TSA agents and police officers. "Before we proceed, I need to understand exactly what happened here and why a decorated service member was treated as a suspected criminal." Janet tried to explain her reasoning, but her earlier confidence had completely evaporated. Her words came out in a jumbled rush about fake IDs and suspicious appearances, making her sound increasingly unprofessional with each sentence. "You detained this individual for over 2 hours because she didn't look military enough for your personal standards?" Agent Walsh asked, her tone suggesting that someone's career might be in serious jeopardy. Detective Chen stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. "We were following standard security protocols. When identification seems questionable, we're required to investigate thoroughly." Colonel Mitchell spoke for the first time, his voice carrying decades of military authority. "Sergeant Martinez, are you uninjured and have you been treated with appropriate respect during this detention?" The use of Sarah's rank sent a shockwave through the room. Several of the airport officials looked at each other with growing alarm, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. "I'm fine, sir," Sarah replied, standing at attention despite her casual clothes. These individuals were performing what they believed to be their duty, even if their methods were somewhat misguided. Her gracious response only made the airport officials feel worse about their treatment of her. They had expected anger, demands for apologies, or threats of legal action. Instead, they were witnessing the kind of professional courtesy that marked truly elite military personnel. Agent Walsh opened a tablet computer and began reading from Sarah's military record. "Let me share some information about the person you've been interrogating. Sergeant Sarah Martinez, current assignment classified, previous deployments to 3 different combat zones, recipient of the Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and numerous other commendations for valor and distinguished service." The room fell completely silent. Janet felt sick to her stomach as she realized how badly she had misjudged the situation. The young woman she had dismissed as a fraud was actually a decorated war hero with more combat experience than most soldiers twice her age. Additionally, Agent Walsh continued, Sergeant Martinez recently completed a classified mission that directly contributed to preventing a terrorist attack on American soil. The details of that mission will remain classified, but I can tell you that her actions likely saved hundreds of lives. Derek, the TSA agent who had made the joke about being a Navy SEAL, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His casual mockery of someone who had actually earned the respect he pretended to have was now exposed for what it was: ignorant prejudice based on superficial appearances. Colonel Mitchell addressed the room with barely controlled anger. This incident represents a fundamental failure to understand what modern military service looks like. The most effective operators in today's military are often those who can blend in anywhere, who don't fit traditional stereotypes, and who can accomplish extraordinary things while looking completely ordinary. He turned to look directly at Sarah with obvious pride. Sergeant Martinez is exactly the kind of service member our country needs. Intelligent, capable, and humble enough to endure personal insults rather than compromise operational security by revealing classified information about her assignments. The realization hit the airport officials like a physical blow. Sarah hadn't defended herself more vigorously, not because she was guilty, but because doing so might have revealed sensitive information about her actual military role. She had protected national security, even while being humiliated by the very people she had sworn to protect. Agent Walsh closed her tablet and looked around the room. This incident will be thoroughly investigated, and there will be consequences for the inappropriate treatment of military personnel. However, our immediate concern is ensuring that Sergeant Martinez can continue her travel without further harassment. The transformation in the room was complete. The people who had been so certain of Sarah's guilt now couldn't meet her eyes. They had learned a hard lesson about the danger of making judgments based on appearances, and the cost of their prejudice was becoming clear with each passing moment. As the group prepared to leave the security office, Agent Walsh had one final surprise that would make this incident even more memorable. She pulled out her phone and placed a call that everyone in the room could hear. "General Patterson, this is Agent Walsh. I'm at the airport with Sergeant Martinez, and we've encountered the situation we discussed. Yes, sir. I believe it's time to implement the new protocol we talked about." She hung up and turned to address the airport officials. One last time, due to the nature of Sergeant Martinez's recent service and ongoing security concerns, the Department of Defense is implementing new identification verification procedures. This airport will serve as the pilot location for an advanced system that will prevent future incidents like this one. Within minutes, a team of technicians arrived with equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. They began installing a sophisticated computer terminal next to the existing security checkpoint, working with the kind of efficiency that suggested this wasn't their first such installation. This system, Agent Walsh explained to the gathered TSA supervisors, connects directly to military personnel databases and can provide real-time verification of service members' identities and clearance levels. It will prevent situations where legitimate military personnel are detained based on appearances rather than facts. The new computer system came online with a series of electronic beeps and status lights. One of the technicians handed Janet a military ID card and instructed her to test the system. She slid the card through the reader with trembling hands, still mortified by her earlier mistakes. The computer's response was immediate and dramatic. Instead of a simple, verified message, the screen displayed detailed information about the cardholder, including their rank, unit, and a series of commendations that filled the entire display. More importantly, the computer announced its findings in a clear, authoritative voice that could be heard throughout the security area. Identification verified. Sergeant Sarah Martinez, United States Army Special Operations, current security, clearance, top secret. Recent commendations, Bronze Star for Valor, Purple Heart, Meritorious Service Medal. Status, active duty, classified assignment. The announcement drew attention from travelers throughout the terminal. People stopped what they were doing to listen as the computer continued to detail Sarah's impressive military record. The contrast between the skeptical treatment she had received just hours earlier and the respect now being shown by an automated system was stark and powerful. Janet realized that everyone in the terminal could hear the computer's announcement, and many people were now staring at Sarah with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. Some of the same passengers who had been filming her arrest earlier were now trying to get pictures with her, suddenly eager to be associated with a real military hero. From now on, Agent Walsh announced loudly enough for all the TSA agents to hear, any military identification that seems questionable should be verified through this system before any individual is detained or questioned. The days of making assumptions based on age, gender, or physical appearance are over. Sarah watched the installation process with mixed emotions. She was glad that other service members wouldn't have to endure what she had experienced, but she couldn't help feeling sad that such measures were necessary. The incident had revealed something troubling about how little some civilians understood about modern military service. Colonel Mitchell approached her quietly while the technicians finished their work. "You handled this situation with remarkable grace, Sergeant. Lesser people might have lost their temper or demanded immediate vindication." "Sir, losing my temper wouldn't have served any useful purpose," Sarah replied. "Besides, these people aren't our enemies. They're just uninformed about what military service looks like today." Her mature response impressed even the hardened colonel. He had seen many young soldiers react poorly to far less provocation, yet here was someone who had maintained perfect composure while being publicly humiliated by people who should have been thanking her for her service. The new computer system completed its setup procedures and began running diagnostic tests. Each test confirmed that the technology was working perfectly, capable of identifying genuine military personnel instantly while flagging fraudulent documents just as quickly. As word spread throughout the airport about what had happened, other travelers began approaching Sarah to shake her hand and thank her for her service. The transformation was remarkable. She went from being treated as a suspected criminal to being recognized as the hero she actually was, all because a computer system had the ability to see past appearances to the truth underneath. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Human judgment, clouded by prejudice and assumption, had failed completely. It took an artificial intelligence system to recognize what should have been obvious from the beginning, that heroes come in all shapes, sizes, and ages, and that true service to country has nothing to do with how someone looks in civilian clothes. 3 months after the airport incident, the story of Sarah Martinez had spread far beyond the terminals where it began. News outlets picked up the tale of the decorated soldier who was detained because she didn't look military enough, and the computer system that finally revealed her true identity. The story became a powerful symbol of how dangerous assumptions based on appearance can be. The new identification verification system had been installed in over 50 airports across the country, preventing dozens of similar incidents. Military personnel no longer dreaded traveling in civilian clothes, knowing that their service would be recognized and respected, regardless of how they looked. Sarah received orders for a new assignment, one that would take her to a training facility, where she would help develop better protocols for recognizing and supporting military personnel in civilian settings. Her experience had opened eyes throughout the Department of Defense about the challenges faced by service members who didn't fit traditional stereotypes. Janet Williams, the TSA supervisor who had been so certain of Sarah's guilt, underwent extensive retraining on military identification procedures and unconscious bias. The incident had shaken her confidence, but it also taught her valuable lessons about the importance of following proper protocols rather than relying on personal assumptions. She often thought about Sarah's gracious response to being mistreated, and how a real military professional had handled the situation with more dignity than she herself had shown. Janet became an advocate for the new computer verification systems and frequently shared Sarah's story with new TSA trainees as an example of how badly things could go wrong when judgment was based on appearances. Detective Chen also took lessons from the incident. She implemented new training procedures for airport police that emphasized the importance of treating all travelers with respect while still maintaining security. The phrase "guilty until proven innocent" was replaced with "professional courtesy" while following proper procedures. The computer system itself became something of a celebrity in security circles. Its ability to instantly verify military credentials while providing detailed service records had prevented numerous misunderstandings and had actually caught several cases of genuine identity fraud. The technology proved that artificial intelligence could sometimes be more fair and accurate than human judgment. Sarah's story was featured in military publications and became required reading for TSA training programs. Her example of maintaining composure under pressure while protecting classified information became a case study in how professional military personnel should conduct themselves in difficult civilian situations. The broader impact of the incident extended beyond airport security. Schools began teaching students about the diversity of modern military service, emphasizing that heroes come in all forms and that service to country isn't limited to people who fit traditional expectations. The story challenged stereotypes and opened conversations about unconscious bias in many different settings. Years later, Sarah would often encounter TSA agents who recognized her name from training materials. Instead of skepticism, she was greeted with respect and gratitude. The computer verification systems had become standard equipment, and the idea of detaining military personnel based solely on appearance seemed as outdated as using paper tickets. The incident that had begun as a source of embarrassment and frustration had ultimately led to positive changes that benefited thousands of service members. Sarah's quiet dignity in the face of unfair treatment had sparked reforms that made travel safer and more respectful for everyone in uniform. Looking back, she realized that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons in foreign countries, but with patience and professionalism in everyday situations at home. Her refusal to respond to prejudice with anger had accomplished more than any heated argument could have achieved. The computer that had finally announced her special operations status had done more than verify her identity. It had helped society recognize that modern heroes might not look like the soldiers in old movies, but their service and sacrifice were no less real or valuable. In the end, technology had succeeded where human judgment had failed, proving that the truth has a way of emerging regardless of the obstacles placed in its path. The story of Sarah Martinez became a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that assumptions can be dangerous, and that sometimes it takes a computer to see what humans miss. The true measure of a person's worth lies not in how they look, but in what they've done in service to others.